The hum of the private jet was low, steady, almost soothing, but inside the cabin, the atmosphere was anything but calm. The plush leather seats, polished mahogany tables, and chilled champagne bottles painted a picture of elegance and power. Yet for Emily Carter, sitting in the farthest corner with her hands protectively covering her 6-month pregnant belly, that luxury felt like a cage. Her heart was pounding, her eyes were burning, and every sound from across the aisle cut deeper into her soul. Her husband, Adrian Carter, was leaning back comfortably in one of the oversized seats, a glass of whiskey in his hand. His tie was loosened, his smile smug, his laughter filling the cabin. Next to him, draped in a shimmering silver dress that left little to the imagination, sat Vanessa Moore, his lover. Her manicured fingers rested boldly on Adrian's arm, her red lips brushing against his ear as she whispered something that made him roar with laughter. It wasn't just intimacy, it was a public display meant to humiliate. Emily could feel every pair of eyes flicking between her and the couple across the cabin. A few business partners, 2 high-profile investors, and even the flight attendants had been forced to witness the ugly scene. Everyone knew Adrian was married. Everyone knew she was his wife. And yet, here he was, flaunting his mistress before them like she didn't even exist. She blinked rapidly, willing herself not to cry. Crying would only make it worse. Crying would give Vanessa the satisfaction she clearly wanted. Because Vanessa wasn't subtle. Every time she leaned closer to Adrian, she shot a triumphant glance at Emily, like a cat playing with a wounded bird. Her laugh was sharp, shrill, and cutting. Emily shifted uncomfortably in her seat, feeling her baby move beneath her ribs. She whispered under her breath, "It's okay, sweetheart. Mom is here. We'll be fine." But deep inside, she didn't believe her own words. She felt trapped in a marriage that had become a nightmare, trapped on a jet where she couldn't escape, trapped in humiliation that cut her deeper than any blade could. Adrian raised his glass in mock celebration, turning his head just enough to look at her. "Cheer up, Emily," he said loudly, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "You should be happy. Not everyone gets to fly to Paris on a jet like this. You should try smiling. You look pathetic." The room chuckled awkwardly. The investors exchanged glances, some embarrassed, some entertained. Emily's cheeks flushed with heat, but she didn't respond. She had learned long ago that answering Adrian in public only made things worse. He thrived on her pain. He enjoyed showing the world how little she mattered to him now. Vanessa leaned into him, her perfume filling the air. "She's just jealous, darling," she purred loud enough for everyone to hear. "Not every woman can keep a man like you." Then she tilted her head back and laughed, a cruel, triumphant laugh that sliced through Emily's chest. Emily's fingers tightened on the armrest. The baby kicked again, as if sensing her distress. For a moment, she thought she might collapse. The humiliation was unbearable, but it was the betrayal that shattered her. Once upon a time, Adrian had been the man she trusted with her life, the man who promised to love her through every thwart. The jet hit a pocket of turbulence, jolting the passengers. Vanessa shrieked playfully and clutched Adrian's arm, while he chuckled and reassured her. Emily steadied herself with one hand on her belly. The irony wasn't lost on her. Her husband could comfort his mistress, but he had never once asked her if she was comfortable during this pregnancy. The silence that followed the turbulence was heavy. Emily tried to focus on the hum of the engines, on her breathing, on anything that would keep her from breaking down in front of these people. But then Vanessa's voice rang out again, sharp as a knife. "Tell me, Emily," she sneered, turning her head deliberately. "Do you ever wonder why he chose me? Why he prefers my company instead of yours?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Adrian smirked, taking another sip of his drink, not even attempting to defend his wife. The investors leaned forward, uncomfortable but curious. Emily swallowed hard, her throat tight. She wanted to scream, to cry, to demand respect, but the words caught in her chest. She sat frozen, her silence only feeding their cruelty. Vanessa leaned closer, her eyes glinting with malice. "It's simple, really. Some women are meant to be admired, cherished, desired." She tilted her head smugly. "And others, well, they're just meant to be forgotten." The cabin erupted in soft laughter, muffled whispers, and clicking glasses. Emily's eyes blurred with tears she refused to let fall. She turned her gaze to the small oval window, the night sky stretching endlessly outside. Stars blinked faintly, mocking her with their distance. Her stomach churned, her heart ached, and in that moment she realized she was completely alone. Adrian had abandoned her emotionally long before this night, and now he was stripping her dignity in front of the world. But what she didn't realize, what no one realized, was that someone else had been watching. Someone who had remained silent, his expression unreadable, his glass untouched. Alexander Carter, Adrian's older brother, sat at the far end of the cabin. A billionaire in his own right, he had built empires with the kind of precision and discipline Adrian had never possessed. His presence was powerful, commanding, yet restrained. Unlike Adrian, he didn't need to flaunt his wealth or charm. He simply existed, and the room bent to his gravity. Throughout the evening, Alexander hadn't said a word. He had observed quietly, his sharp eyes missing nothing: the cruelty, the humiliation, the mockery. Now, as Vanessa's laugh echoed again and Emily's shoulders trembled in silent despair, his jaw tightened, his knuckles whitened around the stem of his glass. For the first time, he leaned forward, his voice cutting through the cabin like steel. "That's enough." The laughter died instantly. All eyes turned to him. Adrian froze, the smirk slipping from his face. Vanessa blinked, her painted lips parting in shock. And Emily, wide-eyed, looked up at the man she had barely dared to acknowledge until now, because what Alexander was about to do would change everything. The silence that followed Alexander's words was deafening. The private jet, once filled with laughter and arrogance, now felt colder, tighter, almost suffocating. Everyone turned to look at him, their surprise clear. Adrian shifted uncomfortably in his seat, caught between irritation and unease. Vanessa's confident smirk faltered, her perfectly manicured nails tapping nervously on the rim of her glass. Emily sat frozen, her wide eyes fixed on Alexander. For a moment, just a brief, fleeting moment, she felt like someone had finally seen her, seen the humiliation, the cruelty, the quiet suffering. But that moment of fragile relief was short-lived. Adrian let out a dry laugh, shaking his head. "Come on, Alex," he sneered, raising his glass toward his brother. "Don't tell me you're taking her side. She's my wife, not yours. If I want to joke with her, I will." "Joke?" Alexander's voice was calm, dangerously calm. "That didn't sound like a joke to me." Adrian's eyes narrowed, but instead of answering, he leaned back in his seat, pretending not to care. Vanessa, however, wasn't ready to back down. She leaned forward, her voice dripping with mock sympathy. "Honestly, Alexander, you shouldn't waste your concern. Some women just don't know how to keep their husbands happy. Emily had her chance. Now it's my turn." The words sliced through the cabin like glass. Emily flinched, her hands instinctively clutching her belly. Heat rose to her face, her humiliation growing unbearable. She wanted to disappear, to vanish into thin air, but she couldn't. She was trapped in this flying prison, forced to listen as the woman her husband paraded beside him mocked her existence. Adrian chuckled, clearly entertained. "Vanessa's right. Emily, you've been lacking. I deserve more. I deserve a woman who understands me, who doesn't drag me down with her mood swings and demands." He gestured toward Vanessa with a smug grin. "That's why she's here. She makes me feel alive." Gasps rippled through the cabin. Even the investors shifted uncomfortably in their seats. This was no longer just gossip. It was cruelty, delivered with an audience. Emily's chest tightened. She bit her lip so hard she tasted blood, fighting back the sob clawing at her throat. But before she could respond, Vanessa stood. The click of her heels on the polished floor echoed like a countdown. She walked across the narrow aisle, stopping in front of Emily's seat. "Let's be honest," Vanessa sneered, folding her arms across her chest. "Look at you, sitting there like a wounded animal, hiding behind your belly. Do you think pity will keep a man? Do you think being pregnant makes you special? Women get pregnant every day." Emily's breath hitched, her hands tightened over her stomach, as if shielding her unborn child from the venom spilling from this woman's mouth. Vanessa leaned down, her face inches from Emily's. Her perfume was overwhelming, sharp and nauseating. Her voice dropped into a whisper meant to sting deeper. "He doesn't love you anymore. He never will. You're nothing but dead weight." Then, in one swift, shocking motion, Vanessa's hand shot out. She grabbed a fistful of Emily's hair and yanked. Emily gasped, a cry of pain ripping from her throat as her head snapped back. The sudden jolt nearly threw her from her seat. Panic surged through her body, her heart racing, her arms instinctively wrapping around her belly to protect her baby. The cabin erupted. Gasps, shouts, the scrape of chairs against the floor. One of the investors half rose from his seat in shock. The flight attendant dropped the bottle she was holding, glass shattering across the floor. But the loudest sound was Adrian's laugh. He didn't move to stop Vanessa. He didn't protect his pregnant wife. Instead, he leaned back in his chair, grinning, enjoying the spectacle like it was entertainment. "Careful, Vanessa," he drawled, smirking. "Don't hurt her too much. She's fragile." Emily's tears blurred her vision as pain burned across her scalp. Her humiliation was complete. Her husband had allowed his mistress to lay hands on her, on his pregnant wife, and instead of stopping it, he encouraged it. Her chest heaved. Her voice cracked as she whispered, "Adrian, please." But her plea was drowned in Vanessa's laughter, cruel and triumphant. "You see? Even she knows she's powerless. She can't fight me. She can't fight anyone." Emily's whole body trembled, her dignity shredded. She felt the weight of every pair of eyes on her, judging, pitying, mocking. She wanted to scream, to fight back, but the fear of harming her baby held her frozen. All she could do was endure the humiliation, her heart breaking with every second. It was Alexander who moved first. His chair scraped back with a suddenness that silenced the cabin. He crossed the aisle in 2 long strides, his presence so commanding that Vanessa's grip faltered. He seized her wrist with a strength that made her gasp and forced her to release Emily's hair. "That's enough," he said, his voice like ice. His glare pinned Vanessa in place, her bravado crumbling under the weight of his authority. "Touch her again, and you'll regret it." Vanessa recoiled, rubbing her wrist, her eyes flashing with fear and fury. Adrian's smirk vanished, replaced by a flicker of unease. For once, he seemed to realize that his brother was not going to ignore his behavior. Emily, her hair disheveled, her cheeks wet with tears, sat trembling in her seat. Her chest rose and fell with ragged breaths. She looked up at Alexander, shock and gratitude mingling in her gaze. No one had ever stood up for her like that, not since her marriage began to crumble. Alexander didn't look at her directly, but his tone softened ever so slightly. "You're safe now," he said quietly, then turned his steely gaze back to Adrian. "You disgust me," he said flatly. "You let another woman assault your pregnant wife, and you laughed. Do you have any idea what kind of man that makes you?" The cabin was silent. Adrian opened his mouth, but no words came. His arrogance was faltering. Emily's tears slowed, but the ache in her chest only grew. She had been humiliated, degraded, almost broken, and yet, in that moment, a seed of something unfamiliar stirred inside her. It wasn't hope, not yet. But it was the faintest whisper of strength, because for the first time someone had seen her pain and refused to let it continue. And she couldn't shake the feeling that this night was only the beginning of what was to come. The cabin of the jet felt like a courtroom, every eye fixed on the tall, imposing figure of Alexander Carter. His presence filled the room, swallowing the smugness that had lingered only moments before. Where Adrian thrived on cheap laughter and cruel games, Alexander carried something heavier, an authority that silenced people without him raising his voice. Emily sat hunched in her seat, her hair disheveled from Vanessa's assault, her body trembling as she clutched her stomach protectively. Tears still glistened on her cheeks, but she was no longer completely alone. For the first time in years, someone had stepped between her and her tormentors. She could hardly breathe as she tried to process what had just happened. Vanessa had backed away, her bravado cracked. Her painted lips parted as she tried to speak, but no sound came out. She had underestimated Alexander. Everyone had. Alexander's gaze swept the room, slow and deliberate. "What you all just witnessed," he said evenly, "was not only shameful, it was criminal." The investors shifted uncomfortably in their seats. These were men used to power plays, to watching fortunes rise and fall like dice in a game. But even they could not ignore the weight of his words. His voice carried something that demanded obedience, like a gavel striking down. Adrian forced a laugh, though his eyes betrayed unease. "Oh, come on, Alex. Don't make this into something it isn't. We were having fun. Emily's too sensitive. Vanessa just got carried away. No harm done." "No harm done?" Alexander's eyes narrowed, his jaw tightening. "She's carrying your child, Adrian? Do you even understand what that means? His voice sharpened, slicing through the air. That woman is your wife, the mother of your unborn baby. And you sat there laughing while your mistress assaulted her. The word mistress hung in the air, vulgar and raw. Vanessa flinched. Adrian's expression darkened. For the first time, shame crept across his features, though he quickly tried to mask it with arrogance. You're overreacting, Adrian snapped. This is between me and my wife. Stay out of it. No, Alexander replied, his voice low but firm. It stopped being just between you and her the moment you dragged her dignity through the mud in front of all these witnesses. You humiliated her, Adrian, and by extension, you humiliated this family. The investors exchanged looks. The Carter name carried weight in every corner of the world. To stain it so publicly was dangerous, reckless. Emily swallowed hard, her heart pounding. She had always thought Alexander distant, untouchable, uninterested in her existence. But now, hearing him speak, she realized he had been watching all along, watching and silently judging the cruelty she endured. Adrian's temper flared. He stood abruptly, his glass slamming onto the table, amber liquid spilling over the polished wood. Don't you dare lecture me. You think you're better than me? Because you built a few companies and have the press eating out of your hand? You've never been married. You don't know what it's like. Alexander rose too, his towering frame dwarfing his younger brother's. The contrast between them was stark. Adrian's desperation against Alexander's unshakable composure. I may not be married, Alexander said, his voice calm but edged with steel. But I know what it means to be a man, and a man protects his family. A man doesn't abandon his wife. A man doesn't laugh while the woman carrying his child is attacked. Silence blanketed the cabin. No one dared move. The investors stared. The flight attendants stood frozen, and Emily's breath came in shallow bursts as she clutched her belly tighter. Vanessa tried to recover her composure, stepping forward with a brittle laugh. This is ridiculous. Adrian doesn't need to listen to you. He's his own man. He doesn't need his big brother telling him how to handle his marriage. Alexander turned his head slowly, fixing her with a glare so sharp she stumbled back. You don't belong here, he said coldly. You are nothing but a parasite, feeding off his weakness. This plane is for family, business, and legacy. You are none of those things. Vanessa's cheeks flushed, her lips trembling as her confidence evaporated. For once, she had no clever retort. Adrian reached for her arm, trying to steady her, but Alexander's next words cut through the cabin like a blade. Emily stays, he declared. You leave. Gasps filled the room. Vanessa stared at him in shock. What? You can't just... I can, Alexander interrupted, his voice like thunder. And I will. The Carter name has stood for power, dignity, and loyalty. You've dragged it through filth long enough. Adrian's face reddened. You can't make decisions for me. I'm not some child for you to boss around. Alexander's eyes hardened. You already proved you're no man. If you were, you wouldn't be here flaunting your mistress while your pregnant wife cries in silence. Emily's tears spilled again, but this time they were different. They weren't just tears of pain. They were tears of something new. She felt seen, protected. For years, she had endured Adrian's cruelty alone, and now someone had stood up for her in front of everyone. Her hand trembled as she brushed a tear from her cheek, whispering almost inaudibly, "Thank you." Alexander heard. His gaze flicked to her for the briefest second, softening, before returning to Adrian. "This ends tonight," he said firmly. "When we land, you and I will have a very serious conversation about consequences. But for now," his voice rose, commanding the room. "Not another word against her. Do you understand?" No one dared argue. Not Adrian, not Vanessa, not even the investors who had built their fortunes on confrontation. The cabin was heavy with tension, every breath thick with unspoken truths. Adrian slumped back into his seat, his jaw clenched, his pride wounded but his power slipping. Vanessa sat beside him, pale and shaken, her claws dulled. Emily leaned back slowly, her heart pounding, her body trembling. For the first time in what felt like forever, she wasn't drowning alone. But beneath the fragile relief, another fear simmered. Because if Alexander had stepped in now, what else did he know? And what would happen when all the hidden truths finally came to light? Because one thing was certain, this was only the beginning of Adrian Carter's downfall. The private jet was still in the air, but it felt like the ground had already shifted beneath everyone's feet. The atmosphere was thick, suffocating, and charged with tension. Every passenger, investors, attendants, even the pilots behind the cockpit door, knew they were witnessing something they would never forget. Alexander Carter stood in the center of it all, towering over his younger brother with a calm that radiated more power than Adrian's loud arrogance ever could. His words still echoed in the silence. "This ends tonight." Emily sat quietly, her hands still trembling over her belly. Her body ached from the pull on her hair, her face burned with humiliation, but for the first time in years she felt the faint stirrings of safety. Alexander's presence was like a wall between her and the cruelty that had nearly broken her. Adrian, however, wasn't done. He leaned forward, his expression twisted with frustration. "Don't think you can humiliate me like this, Alex. You may be the so-called golden brother, the billionaire with the perfect image, but I've built my own life. You don't control me." Alexander's eyes narrowed slightly, but his voice remained even. "No, Adrian, you don't control yourself, and that's the problem." He turned slowly, deliberately, toward the investors seated nearby. "Gentlemen, you've seen it with your own eyes. This man, who claims to represent the Carter name, who sits on the board of our ventures, parades his mistress in front of you while degrading his wife, a woman carrying the next heir to our family. Do you trust a man like that to handle your money, your contracts, your partnerships?" The investors stiffened. None dared to speak, but their expressions betrayed unease. They had invested not just in Adrian, but in the Carter name, and now that name was tainted by his recklessness. Adrian's face went pale, then red with fury. "You wouldn't dare." "I just did." Alexander cut him off. His voice rose slightly, carrying the full weight of his authority. "I will not allow you to tarnish what generations have built. Your behavior tonight is more than a personal failure. It's a disgrace to this family, this company, and this legacy." Vanessa scoffed, crossing her arms. "Please, everyone here knows Adrian is the real charmer, not you. You hide behind your billions, but Adrian, he knows how to win people over. That's why he doesn't need your approval." Alexander's gaze snapped to her, sharp as a blade. "You mistake manipulation for charm, and you mistake greed for love. What exactly do you think Adrian has given you, Vanessa? A few dresses? A seat on this jet? Do you know what he's taken to pay for them?" Vanessa blinked, suddenly uncertain. "What are you talking about?" Alexander reached into his briefcase, which had been resting at his side. He pulled out a thin folder and tossed it onto the table with a sharp slap. Paper spilled across the polished wood. "Financial records," he said coldly. "Withdrawals, transfers, unauthorized spending accounts, all tied to Adrian Carter. Hundreds of thousands funneled into hotels, jewelry, and entertainment, most of it with your name attached." The investors leaned forward, eyes widening as they scanned the documents. Murmurs rippled through the cabin. Adrian lunged for the papers, his face contorting with panic. "Those are private. You had no right to." "I have every right," Alexander interrupted, his voice booming. "I warned you months ago, Adrian. I saw the discrepancies. I saw the reckless spending, and I gave you a chance to correct it. Instead, you doubled down. You used company money to fund your affair, to keep this woman satisfied, while your wife sat at home, pregnant, wondering where you were." The room froze. Adrian's betrayal was no longer a private sin whispered about in shadows. It was fact, laid bare under the unforgiving light of evidence. Emily gasped softly, her hand flying to her mouth. She had suspected Adrian of cheating, but she had never known the depth of his deceit. The money, the lies, the betrayal that went beyond their marriage and into business. Adrian's voice cracked as he tried to recover. "You don't understand, Alex. I was going to pay it back. It was temporary. Just a loan." "A loan?" Alexander barked, his composure cracking into controlled fury. "You call stealing from your own company a loan? You've put every investor at risk. You've put our family at risk." Vanessa's face drained of color. She looked at Adrian with wide, panicked eyes. "You told me it was your money. You told me." "Shut up," Adrian hissed, grabbing her arm. But she yanked it away, her voice rising in desperation. "You lied to me? You made me believe you were in control, that you could give me everything. And all this time, you were stealing?" Her shrill voice echoed through the cabin, sealing Adrian's fate. Alexander's gaze cut between them, cold and final. This is what happens when arrogance replaces responsibility, when lust replaces loyalty. You've built your house on lies, Adrian, and tonight, he slammed the folder shut, his tone ringing with judgment, it collapses. The cabin was utterly silent. Adrian sank back into his chair, defeated but still seething, his pride clawing at whatever scraps of dignity he had left. Vanessa sat stiffly beside him, her once smug expression replaced with fear. Emily's chest rose and fell in rapid breaths. She felt like she was watching her life unravel before her eyes. But for once, it wasn't her being torn apart. Adrian's mask had slipped, and the world finally saw him for what he was. Her eyes flicked to Alexander. Gratitude, confusion, and awe collided in her chest. He had destroyed Adrian's facade with surgical precision, and in doing so, he had given her something she thought she had lost forever, the possibility of justice. Alexander straightened, looking down at his brother one last time. When we land, the board will hear of this. You'll answer for every dollar, every lie, every humiliation you've caused. And Emily. He turned toward her, his tone softening. She deserves better. She will get better. Emily's lips parted, her throat tightening. She wanted to thank him, to tell him what his words meant, but the lump in her chest was too heavy. Instead, a single tear slipped down her cheek, glistening in the dim cabin light. And though Adrian sat only a few feet away, for the first time, Emily no longer felt like his prisoner. She felt free. What she didn't know was that freedom came at a price, and the battle was only beginning. The jet sliced through the night sky, but inside, the world was unraveling for Adrian Carter. He sat stiffly in his seat, jaw clenched, sweat beating at his temple. The confident smirk that had carried him through years of deception was gone, stripped away by Alexander's cold precision. Emily sat opposite him, still shaken, her hand resting protectively over her stomach. Her body trembled from the memory of Vanessa's attack, but her eyes, red and swollen from tears, remained fixed on Adrian. She had loved him once. She had carried his burdens, believed his promises, dreamed of their future together. But now, staring at the man before her, she realized he was a stranger. Vanessa, meanwhile, was unraveling in her own way. Her flawless exterior cracked, panic spreading across her painted features. She had built her confidence on Adrian's charm, his whispered promises, his expensive gifts. But with Alexander's revelation, those gifts had turned to ash. They weren't tokens of love. They were stolen trinkets funded by deception. "I can explain," Adrian muttered, his voice shaky but still laced with arrogance. His eyes darted toward the investors, as if appealing for sympathy. "This is being blown out of proportion. It's not what it looks like." Alexander's expression hardened. "Don't insult us further. We've seen the records. We've seen the betrayal. The question now is, what else have you been hiding?" The investors leaned forward, their eyes sharp. They were men who thrived on information, who smelled weakness like wolves circling prey. And Adrian was bleeding. Adrian ran a hand through his hair, his composure cracking. "Look, I needed the money. I was going to pay it back once the new deal's closed. Vanessa, she needed support." He gestured weakly toward her. Vanessa's head snapped toward him, her eyes flashing. "Support?" she hissed. "You told me it was your money. You told me you had everything under control. I didn't sign up to be dragged into some scandal that could destroy me." Adrian grabbed her wrist, his voice sharp. "Keep your mouth shut." She yanked her hand free, her voice rising with fury and fear. "No, Adrian, I won't. You lied to me. You made me believe I was safe with you. And now what? I'll be ruined too? Do you think I'm going to go down with you?" Her words sliced through the cabin, raw and desperate. The investors exchanged looks, some almost smirking at the implosion happening before them. Alexander stood silent, letting the chaos expose more than he ever could with words. Emily's heart pounded. Each confession was like a stone dropping into her chest. She had endured his cruelty, his neglect, his betrayal. But hearing it spoken aloud, hearing Vanessa admit the lies, there was no denying the truth anymore. "You told me," Vanessa continued, her voice trembling, "that your brother was jealous of you, that you were the real brains of the family, that soon you'd have more than him. You said I'd be by your side when it happened. Was that a lie too?" Adrian's face twisted with rage. "Don't twist this, Vanessa. I gave you everything." "You gave me nothing but borrowed luxury," she snapped back. "You promised me power, stability. Instead, you gave me scraps paid for with stolen money. Do you know what happens to women tied to scandals like this? We're discarded. Forgotten. I won't let you drag me down. Her words rang with desperation, but beneath the panic was truth. Vanessa was a survivor, and she could see Adrian's ship sinking. Alexander finally stepped forward, his voice like steel. You see, Adrian, even she sees what you've become. You used her, just as you've used everyone else. Emily, this family, our name, even the people who trusted you with their investments. And now the mask is gone. Adrian's breathing was ragged, his eyes darting between Vanessa, Emily, and his brother. You can't do this to me. You can't all turn against me. Emily's lips parted, her voice breaking the silence. It was the first time she had spoken since the assault. You already did this to yourself, Adrian. Her words were soft, trembling, but they carried more weight than any accusation. The entire cabin stilled, listening. Emily's eyes shimmered with tears, but her voice grew stronger. I begged you to love me. I begged you to see our baby, but you didn't care. You chose her. You chose your pride. And now the whole world knows what you are. Adrian flinched as though struck. For a moment he looked almost human, haunted, broken. But the flash of vulnerability vanished quickly, replaced by anger. You think you're better than me, Emily? You think anyone will believe you without me? You're nothing without this family name. Alexander's voice cut like a whip. You're wrong, Adrian. She is everything this family should stand for. Loyalty, dignity, resilience. And you're the one who has nothing. Vanessa's laugh was sharp, bitter. He's right. You're finished, Adrian. And I'm not going down with you. I'll find someone who can actually keep his promises. Adrian stared at her in disbelief, betrayal flashing across his face. You're leaving me? Vanessa shrugged, her voice dripping with contempt. You've got nothing left to offer. Why would I stay? The words hung in the air like a final verdict. Adrian, the man who had once strutted with arrogance, now sat crumbling in his seat. His mistress had turned on him. His wife had spoken against him. His brother had destroyed his facade. Emily exhaled shakily, a tear slipping down her cheek. For so long powerless, voiceless. But tonight, Adrian's betrayal had been dragged into the light for all to see. And in that light, she felt something stir inside her, a strength she thought she had lost. Alexander straightened, his voice final. When we land, this will go further. The board will hear. The press will hear. And Adrian, your downfall will be public. Adrian's shoulders slumped, his head hanging low. He had built his world on lies, and now that world was collapsing around him. Emily closed her eyes, her hand pressing to her stomach. For the first time in months, she whispered to her baby, "We're going to be okay." And though her heart still ached, she believed it. But what she didn't realize yet was that this exposure was only the first step, because the real fight for her dignity was still to come. The jet hummed steadily as it cut through the dark night sky, but for Emily, the world had gone silent. The shouting, the accusations, Vanessa's shrill betrayal, Adrian's panicked defenses, all of it blurred into a distant echo. She sat slumped against the leather seat, her trembling hands pressed protectively over her belly. Her body ached, not just from the violent tug on her hair, but from the weight of everything that had been ripped open. She had tried to hold herself together, to endure the humiliation quietly as she always had. But now, with the truth exposed, with Adrian's mask shattered, she felt like the floor had been pulled from under her feet. Her chest heaved as tears spilled freely, unstoppable now. She didn't care who saw. Not the investors, not Vanessa, not even Adrian. The pain was too great to hide. She turned her face toward the oval window, where the stars blinked cold and distant against the endless black. She whispered so faintly only her baby could hear, "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry you have to feel all this with me." Memories flooded her like a dam breaking. She saw herself at 22, the hopeful girl who had fallen in love with Adrian's charm. He had swept her off her feet with grand gestures and promises of forever. She remembered the way her heart had raced when he first took her hand at the gala where they met, whispering, "You're different. You're the one I've been waiting for." She remembered the wedding, lavish, sparkling, a storybook dream. Her parents had cried tears of joy, believing she was marrying into security and love. She had believed it too. She had walked down the aisle with hope in her chest and stars in her eyes, never imagining that those stars would one day turn to ashes. She remembered the sacrifices, how she had given up her career to support his, how she had traded her own dreams for his ambitions. She had believed in him when no one else did, had stood by him when investors laughed at his early failures. She had been his anchor, his confidant, his biggest believer. And this was her reward, sitting humiliated on a jet while he flaunted another woman. Her sobs deepened, her body curling forward, her belly pressed tight against her thighs as she hugged herself, rocking gently as though trying to soothe her own broken heart. The baby kicked, and it only made the ache sharper. "You deserve a better father," she whispered through the tears. "You deserve better than this." The cabin was quieter now. The investors exchanged uneasy glances, uncomfortable with the raw display of pain before them. Vanessa sat stiffly, her lips pressed thin, her confidence shattered. Adrian sat hunched, seething silently, his eyes fixed on the floor. Only Alexander watched Emily closely, his jaw tight, his fists clenching at his sides. "Emily," he said softly, his voice steady but not cold. "You don't have to carry this weight alone anymore." She shook her head, unable to meet his eyes. "But I already did. For years, I gave him everything I had, and now there's nothing left of me." Her voice cracked, the words spilling out like broken glass. "Do you know what it feels like to be invisible? To live in a house full of gold and marble but feel like a ghost? To watch the man you love look at you like you're a burden instead of his partner?" Her tears blurred her vision, her voice trembling with anguish. "I begged him to see me, to love me, and all I got was silence, or worse, cruelty." Her confession pierced the cabin. It wasn't just pain, it was the sound of years of suffering finally breaking free. The investors shifted awkwardly, some lowering their eyes. Even Vanessa, for all her arrogance, looked away. Adrian finally spoke, his tone sharp, defensive. "You think you're some kind of victim? You had everything. The house, the money, the name. Do you know how many women would kill to have what you had?" Emily's head snapped toward him, her face streaked with tears but her eyes blazing with fury. "None of it mattered without love, Adrian. None of it. What good is a mansion if it feels like a prison? What good is money if it comes with betrayal? You broke me. You broke us." Her voice cracked on the last word and she collapsed back against the seat, her sobs returning with a vengeance. Alexander's hands tightened on the edge of the table, his face a mask of restrained rage. He wanted to shout at his brother, to drag him across the floor and force him to look at the woman he had destroyed. But he knew this wasn't his moment. It was Emily's, and she was finally letting the truth out. Her mind spun further back, to the lonely nights in their penthouse when Adrian never came home, to the faint perfume lingering on his shirts, the lipstick stains she tried to pretend she didn't see, to the endless waiting, the excuses, the gaslighting that made her question her own sanity. She remembered standing in the nursery one night, staring at the tiny crib she had decorated alone. She had whispered to her unborn baby, "Maybe he'll come around when you're here. Maybe you'll remind him of love." But tonight had proven otherwise. Her voice broke again as she whispered into the silence of the cabin, "I don't know how much more I can take." The baby kicked again, stronger this time, as though answering her. Emily pressed both hands over her belly, tears dripping down her chin. "I have to be strong for you, but I don't know if I can." For a moment the only sound was her sobbing and the steady hum of the engines. Then, slowly, Alexander moved. He crossed the aisle, lowering himself to her level. His voice was low, steady, meant only for her. "You can," he said. "You're stronger than you think, and you're not alone anymore." Emily looked up at him, her tear-stained face filled with doubt. "But what if I am? What if when this plane lands I have nowhere to go?" Alexander's gaze didn't waver. "Then you come to me. You'll have protection. You'll have a place. You'll have the chance to rebuild." Her lips trembled, fresh tears spilling down. "Why? Why would you help me?" His eyes softened, but his voice remained firm. "Because you deserve it. And because my brother doesn't get to be the end of your story." Emily stared at him, her heart pounding. His words wrapped around her like a lifeline thrown into stormy seas. And though her body still trembled, though her grief was still raw, something inside her shifted. It was small, fragile, but undeniable. A spark. For the first time in a long time, she wondered if maybe, just maybe, her story wasn't over. But as the night stretched on and the jet sped closer to its destination, she didn't yet know that her collapse tonight would become the foundation of her greatest rise. The cabin of the jet felt heavy, filled with the weight of unshed tears and the ruins of a marriage. Emily sat back against her seat, drained from her breakdown. Her eyes were swollen, her voice hoarse, but her hands never left her belly. She whispered to her child as though the tiny life inside her was the only anchor keeping her afloat. Across from her, Adrian sulked in bitter silence, his pride in tatters. His mistress had turned against him, his brother had humiliated him, and his wife, his once quiet, submissive wife, had finally spoken with a strength that cut through his arrogance. He couldn't control the narrative anymore, and it terrified him. But Alexander Carter wasn't finished. He stood at the center of the cabin, broad shoulders squared, his commanding presence demanding attention. When he spoke, his voice was measured, steady, but every word carried the weight of a hammer falling. "Emily," he said, turning his gaze to her, "there's something you need to know, something I should have told you a long time ago." Her brows furrowed, she looked at him with confusion, her lips parting. "What do you mean?" Adrian scoffed, trying to recover a shred of control. "Don't listen to him, Emily. He's just trying to turn you against me. He's always envied me, always tried to steal what's mine." Alexander's glare shut him down instantly. "You stole from yourself, Adrian, and you've lost everything because of it. But Emily," he softened his tone as he returned his gaze to her, "you've had more power than you realize all along." Emily blinked, shaking her head. "I don't understand." Alexander reached into his briefcase again, pulling out another folder, this one bound with a gold seal. He laid it on the table between them. "This is Father's will, the one you were never shown." The cabin fell utterly silent. Adrian's face drained of color, his eyes widening in shock. "You wouldn't," he hissed. "I would," Alexander replied coldly. "And I am." Emily hesitated before reaching forward with trembling hands. She opened the folder, her eyes scanning the elegant script. And then she saw it, her own name written in black ink right alongside Alexander's. Her breath caught. "What is this?" "It's the truth," Alexander said firmly. "When you married Adrian, Father updated the will. He saw you as part of this family, not just as Adrian's wife, but as someone who embodied the values he wanted the Carter name to carry forward. Loyalty, integrity, strength. You were added as a beneficiary, not Adrian, you." Emily's heart pounded in her chest. Her vision blurred as she reread the words again and again, unable to believe them. All this time, she had thought she was powerless, a burden, an afterthought. But here it was in writing. She wasn't nothing. She was an heir to the empire. Adrian shot up from his seat, fury boiling over. "Lies. She doesn't deserve it. She's nothing but a charity case. Father never would have." "He did," Alexander cut in, his voice sharp. "And deep down you know why. He saw through you, Adrian. He knew you lacked the discipline, the character, the strength to lead, so he safeguarded the family's future. Emily was his choice, not you." Gasps rippled through the investors. Vanessa stared wide-eyed, her jaws slack. Even the attendants froze, the revelation sending shockwaves through the cabin. Emily pressed a hand to her chest, her heart racing. I don't know what to say." Alexander stepped closer, his tone softening. "You don't have to say anything, but you need to understand. You are not powerless. You've never been. Adrian tried to strip you of your dignity, but he can't take away who you are. And now you have the legal right to protect yourself and your child." Her lips trembled as fresh tears filled her eyes. Not tears of despair this time, but of disbelief, of overwhelming relief. For so long she had lived in shadows, convinced she had no voice, no strength. And now, suddenly, the truth illuminated everything. Adrian's voice cracked with desperation. "Emily, listen to me. Don't let him twist this. You're my wife. We're supposed to be a team. You can't side with him. You can't destroy me." Emily turned to him slowly, her tears still falling. But when she spoke, her voice carried a quiet strength that startled even herself. "You destroyed yourself, Adrian, and you destroyed us. I begged you for love, for respect, and you gave me betrayal. You don't get to ask for loyalty now." Her words struck harder than any blow. Adrian staggered back, his face crumbling. For the first time he looked small, weak, defeated. Vanessa leaned forward, her smirk returning in a twisted form. "So, she has the money? The power. Looks like you really are finished, Adrian." She laughed cruelly, but the sound rang hollow. Even she seemed shaken by the revelation. Emily ignored her. For the first time, she wasn't looking at Vanessa. She wasn't looking at Adrian. She was looking at herself, at the strength she had forgotten, at the resilience buried beneath years of pain. Her hand rested firmly on her belly as she whispered, "We're going to be okay. Mama's not weak anymore." Alexander inclined his head slightly, a rare softness flickering in his eyes. "That's the truth Father saw in you, and now the world will see it too." Emily closed the folder, her fingers trembling but resolute. She looked at Adrian one last time, her voice calm but final. "When this plane lands, I'm filing for divorce. And this time, you won't take anything from me. Not my child, not my dignity, not my future." Adrian sank back into his chair, his shoulders collapsing under the weight of defeat. The mighty facade he had built for years was gone, and in its place was nothing but a broken man. The jet hummed on, but inside the cabin, a new energy filled the air. Emily wasn't just surviving anymore, she was beginning to rise. And no one, not Adrian, not Vanessa, not even her own fears, could stop what was coming next. The roar of the jet's engines eventually softened into silence as the plane touched down in Paris. But inside Emily Carter's heart, a new fire had begun to roar, louder than any machine. She stepped onto the tarmac with trembling legs, her body still bearing the weight of humiliation, betrayal, and heartbreak. But also something else. Determination. For the first time since her wedding day, she no longer clung to Adrian's shadow. She no longer felt chained to his choices or his cruelty. The revelation of her place in the Carter will had cracked open a door she never knew existed. And through it, she glimpsed a version of herself she had almost forgotten. A woman who could stand tall, who could fight back, who could protect not only herself but her child. Alexander stayed close but gave her space. He didn't hover, didn't crowd her. Instead, he offered quiet guidance. "Tomorrow, you'll meet with the family's attorneys in Paris," he explained as their convoy of black cars pulled away from the airport. "They'll confirm everything I showed you on the jet. You'll see for yourself that the power is yours now. But Emily, power means nothing unless you use it." She nodded, her hands resting on her belly. "I don't know if I'm ready." Alexander's sharp gaze softened. "You weren't ready for betrayal either, but you survived it, and now you'll do more than survive. You'll rise." The words echoed in her mind long after they arrived at the hotel. A 5-star monument of glass and marble. The kind of place where billionaires conducted quiet wars behind closed doors. Emily followed a staff member to her suite, but when she opened the gilded doors, she froze. The room wasn't just luxurious, it was prepared. On one side, a row of designer dresses hung in shades of power. Deep reds, emerald greens, midnight blacks. On the vanity, carefully arranged makeup and jewelry gleamed under the lights. And beside the bed, a note in Alexander's hand. "You are stronger than you know. Wear it. Show it." Her knees buckled, and she sank onto the bed, tears threatening to spill. No one had ever given her tools to rise before. For years, she had been told to shrink, to submit, to stay quiet. And now here was proof that someone believed in her potential. That night, Emily barely slept. Her dreams were restless, filled with echoes of Adrian's cruelty, Vanessa's laughter, and Alexander's steady voice. By dawn, she rose with a decision. She would no longer be the woman hiding in the corner, clutching her stomach in silence. She would become someone her child could look up to. The transformation began slowly. The first step was physical. She stood before the mirror, staring at her pale reflection. Her hair was tangled, her skin blotched from crying. She looked broken. But as she let the stylist Alexander had arranged step in, something shifted. Hours passed in a blur of curling irons, brushes, and powders. When it was over, Emily hardly recognized herself. Her hair cascaded in soft waves, framing her face with elegance. Her eyes shone, no longer dulled by pain, but sharpened by resolve. The swelling around her cheeks had faded, replaced with a glow that spoke not of wealth, but of resilience. The second step was clothing. She slipped into a dark green gown that hugged her curves modestly but powerfully, the fabric flowing like strength itself. Around her neck she fastened a simple but striking diamond pendant, a gift from the Carter estate she had once tucked away in shame, believing she didn't deserve it. Now it rested against her heart like armor. The third step was internal. She stood before the mirror again, her hands resting on her stomach. "We're not weak anymore," she whispered to her unborn child. We're not his victims, we're survivors, fighters, and tomorrow we'll show the world. When she stepped out of the suite that evening, even Alexander paused. For a moment, his carefully composed expression softened into something almost like awe. "You look," he began, then stopped himself. Instead, he simply nodded. "You look ready." Emily smiled faintly, a mix of nerves and determination curling in her chest. "I don't feel ready, but maybe that's the point. I've been waiting for Adrian to give me strength. Now I see. I had it all along." They spent the evening in preparation. Alexander coached her on what was to come. A gala hosted by one of the Carter family's closest business partners, where Adrian was expected to appear and spin his downfall as mere gossip. Emily would attend, not as a silent wife, but as the woman with the will, the truth, and the strength to shatter his lies. She practiced standing tall, speaking clearly, looking directly into the eyes of those who doubted her. Each time she stumbled, Alexander reminded her, "Don't think of Adrian. Think of your child. Protecting your child is protecting yourself." By midnight, Emily collapsed into bed exhausted, but this time, her exhaustion carried purpose. She dreamed not of betrayal, but of standing in the light, unafraid. The next morning, she woke with a calm clarity. The fear was still there. Fear of Adrian's rage, fear of public whispers, fear of stumbling in for the powerful men and women who would judge her. But beneath that fear was a steel she hadn't felt before. She dressed deliberately, choosing a gown of deep crimson, red for survival, red for power, red for the blood she had shed in silence, now transformed into strength. Her heels clicked against the marble floor as she walked, each step louder, more certain. Alexander met her at the entrance, offering his arm. "Tonight," he said, "they'll all see the truth, not just about Adrian, but about you." Emily placed her hand on his arm, steadying herself. "Then let's make sure they never forget it." The convoy carried them to the gala, where chandeliers glittered and cameras flashed. The moment Emily stepped into the grand hall, whispers rippled across the crowd. People expected her to arrive broken, humiliated, invisible. Instead, they saw a woman transformed, strong, radiant, unbowed. Adrian, already inside with Vanessa clinging to his side, froze mid-laugh when he spotted her. His smirk faltered, his glass nearly slipping from his hand. For the first time, he looked like the one who didn't belong. Emily met his gaze, unflinching. She walked forward, every step measured, every breath steady. She wasn't his shadow anymore. She wasn't his victim. She was the storm coming to claim justice. And as the crowd turned to watch, the stage was set for the public reckoning Adrian Carter had feared all along. The grand hall shimmered with chandeliers, a cathedral of wealth and influence where reputations were made or shattered in a single night. The gala was supposed to be Adrian Carter's chance to recover, to charm investors and dismiss the whispers that had begun swirling around him. But when Emily stepped into the room, glowing in crimson, her chin high, her step steady, the night became something else entirely. Every head turned, every whisper sharpened. People had expected a broken woman, hiding from humiliation. Instead, they saw power wrapped in grace, pain transformed into strength. Alexander walked beside her like a shadow of steel, his presence silent but commanding. But it was Emily who drew the eyes, who held the room in a way Adrian never truly had. Adrian's glass trembled in his hand as he watched her cross the hall. Vanessa clung to his arm, her nails digging into his sleeve, her forced smile betraying unease. He tried to regain his composure, raising his voice with false bravado. Well, look who decided to show up. Emily, you're full of surprises." Emily stopped a few feet away, her eyes locking onto his. Her voice, calm and clear, carried across the room. "You're right, Adrian, I am full of surprises. But tonight, you'll be the one surprised." The crowd murmured. Alexander stepped slightly aside, giving her the stage. For years she had been the silent wife, but tonight was hers. Emily lifted a folder from her clutch, the same folder Alexander had shown her on the jet. She held it up, her voice steady. "This is my name in the Carter will. The one your father updated when we married. He believed in loyalty, in dignity, in strength, and he entrusted me with the future of this family. Not you." Gasps rippled through the hall. Cameras flashed. Investors leaned forward, hungry for the spectacle. Adrian's face turned red, his smirk collapsing. "That's a lie," he shouted, his voice cracking. "She's nothing without me." Emily stepped closer, her heels clicking like a judge's gavel. Nothing without you? Her eyes glistened with controlled fury. I gave up everything for you. My career, my dreams, my dignity. And in return, you gave me betrayal. You laughed while your mistress pulled my hair on a plane filled with investors. You stole from your own company to fund your affair. And you dare stand here and call me nothing? The room fell silent, all eyes locked on her. Even Vanessa froze, her grip on Adrian's arm loosening. Alexander's voice rang out from the side, deep and commanding. She speaks the truth. The documents are verified. The board has already been notified. Adrian Carter's time is over. Adrian's world crumbled before the crowd. Investors exchanged glances, their expressions turning cold, calculating. They weren't looking at a leader anymore. They were looking at a liability. Vanessa, sensing the shift, stepped away from Adrian, her voice sharp. You told me you were in control. You told me none of this would touch us. But you're finished, Adrian. I won't go down with you. She tossed her glass onto the table, the champagne spilling like wasted promises, and stalked away under the glare of cameras. Adrian reached out desperately. Vanessa, don't you dare. But she was gone, leaving him alone. Emily's heart pounded, but she stood tall. The crowd wasn't just witnessing Adrian's downfall. They were witnessing her rebirth. She raised her chin, her voice steady though her eyes brimmed with tears. For years, I let myself believe I was weak, that I had to stay silent, that I had to endure. But tonight, I stand here to remind every woman in this room, silence is not strength, enduring cruelty is not loyalty, and love does not mean losing yourself. The hall erupted in applause, sharp and thunderous. Some clapped cautiously, others passionately. But together they built a storm of approval that drowned out Adrian's sputtering protests. He stumbled forward, his voice breaking. You'll regret this, Emily. You'll regret turning against me. Alexander stepped in, his presence like a wall. No, Adrian. The only regret here is yours. You had everything. A loyal wife, a future child, a place in this family, and you threw it all away. Two board members approached, flanking Adrian. One spoke firmly. You're done, Carter. Effective immediately. Your shares are frozen. Your seat on the board is revoked. Security will escort you out. Adrian's face twisted with rage and disbelief. You can't do this. This is my legacy. No, Emily said softly, her voice carrying more power than his shouts. This was your prison. My legacy begins tonight. The guard seized his arms, pulling him toward the exit. Cameras flashed wildly, capturing every second of the spectacle. Adrian fought, cursed, but it was useless. His downfall was public, brutal, and complete. As the doors closed behind him, silence lingered for a beat before giving way to applause once more. Applause for Emily. She stood still, her chest rising and falling with emotion. Tears slid down her cheeks, but they were no longer the tears of a broken woman. They were the tears of release, of victory, of catharsis. She pressed a hand to her belly, whispering through the roar of the crowd, We're free, my love. We're finally free. Alexander approached, his voice low but proud. You did it. You didn't just survive, you conquered. Emily turned to him, her lips trembling into a faint smile. I didn't do it alone. For a moment, the hall seemed to fade, leaving only the two of them standing in the glow of triumph. Emily wasn't naive. Her journey wasn't over. There would still be challenges, still whispers, still wounds to heal. But tonight, she had proven something to herself and to the world. She was no longer defined by Adrian Carter's cruelty. She was Emily Carter, stronger, wiser, unbreakable. As the applause swelled, Alexander leaned close enough for only her to hear. Father was right. You are the future of this family, and I'll stand beside you to make sure no one ever takes that from you again. Emily nodded, her tears shining in the chandelier light. She looked out at the sea of faces, no longer afraid of their judgment. She had faced betrayal, humiliation, despair, and she had risen. The night had begun as Adrian's chance at redemption. It ended as Emily's coronation. And as the cameras captured her standing tall in crimson, her hand on her belly, the world would remember this night as the moment a broken wife became unstoppable. So my wonderful friends, that's how this story comes to a close. If you're still here with me until now, it means something in Emily's journey touched your heart too. Life always tests us, but as Marcus Aurelius said, you have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. Just like Emily, we can all rise from betrayal, find healing, and protect our dignity. If this story moved you, please like this video, share it with someone who might need hope, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel so we can keep walking through these powerful journeys together. My friends, let me ask you this. Have you ever trusted someone so deeply, only to have them betray you in the cruelest way? Imagine a millionaire husband shoving his pregnant wife at a glamorous party. But wait, her savior was her Navy SEAL brother. Stay with me, trust me, you don't want to miss this. Please like, share, and subscribe. The music was loud, the lights shimmered across the sparkling surface of the infinity pool, and laughter echoed from every corner of the luxurious mansion. Guests dressed in designer outfits sipped champagne, snapping photos for social media, eager to prove they belonged at the party of the season. The night seemed perfect, at least for everyone else. At the far edge of the poolside terrace, the young woman stood quietly, her hand resting on the gentle curve of her swollen belly. Her name was Elena Carter, and she was 6 months pregnant. She wore a pale blue maternity dress, simple but graceful, nothing like the glittering gowns surrounding her. She should have been glowing with joy, preparing to welcome her first child. Instead, she stood in the middle of her husband's world, a world where she never truly belonged. Her husband, Marcus Carter, was a millionaire real estate mogul, tall, broad-shouldered, always in the spotlight. Tonight, he was dressed in an ivory tuxedo, his laughter booming as he entertained investors and flirted with women who weren't his wife. Elena watched from the sidelines, her heart aching with every fake smile he flashed. He hadn't touched her hand all evening. He hadn't even introduced her as his wife to half the guests. The humiliation had become unbearable. But Elena stayed. She stayed because she believed marriage was worth saving, because she believed Marcus might still care, and most of all, because of the tiny life inside her. But everything changed in an instant. Marcus's mistress, a striking brunette named Vanessa Steele, slithered toward Elena, her red satin dress clinging to every curve. Her lips curled into a mocking smile. "Well," Vanessa purred loud enough for nearby guests to hear, "don't you look out of place? That dress, is it from last season's bargain rack?" The group around her laughed. Elena's cheeks flushed, but she bit her tongue. She wanted to walk away, to keep the peace. But Vanessa wasn't finished. "You know, Marcus deserves a woman who fits into this world," she sneered, tilting her glass of champagne toward Elena's belly. "Not someone who waddles around like a charity case." The cruel remark drew gasps, a few stifled chuckles. Elena's eyes burned, but she whispered softly, "I am his wife." The words seemed to ignite Marcus. He strode over, his face twisted with irritation. "Enough." He snapped, not at Vanessa, but at Elena. "Why must you always embarrass me? Can't you just keep quiet for once?" Elena's lips trembled. She hadn't raised her voice, hadn't fought back. She had simply reminded them who she was. Yet Marcus treated her like the problem. And then it happened. Marcus's hand shot out, gripping Elena's arm. With a sudden shove, he pushed her backward toward the pool. Her cry pierced the air as her body stumbled, balance faltering, her pregnant belly making it impossible to catch herself. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Time slowed. Elena's arms flailed, her eyes wide with terror as she tipped dangerously close to the edge. The glittering water awaited her. And then, strong arms caught her. A figure burst through the crowd, moving faster than anyone could process. He grabbed Elena before she hit the water, pulling her to safety with a precision that stunned everyone watching. The crowd erupted into whispers, phones flashing as cameras captured every second. Elena blinked through tears, struggling to breathe. She looked up at the man who had saved her and froze. It wasn't just a lifeguard. It was her older brother, Jack Lawson. 6 years older than Elena, Jack had once been her childhood protector before life and the Navy had taken him away. He was tall, muscular, his short hair damp with sweat, his sharp eyes scanning Marcus with a deadly calm. Jack wasn't just a brother. He was a former Navy SEAL, trained for life-or-death situations. Tonight, he wasn't just a guest. He was the one person Marcus never expected, and the last person he should have crossed. The crowd buzzed with tension. Some whispered in shock, others recorded eagerly, sensing the scandal unfolding before their eyes. Marcus's smirk faltered as Jack gently set Elena on her feet, shielding her with his body. "You shoved a pregnant woman." Jack's voice was low, dangerous, steady as steel. "You shoved my sister." Marcus scoffed, trying to laugh it off. It was nothing. She tripped. Everyone saw it. But nobody believed him. Cameras had captured everything. The image of Marcus Carter, the millionaire golden boy, pushing his own wife toward the pool while his mistress watched with delight, was already spreading across social media. Elena clung to Jack's arm, her tears mixing with relief and humiliation. The man she trusted most had tried to destroy her, and the brother she hadn't seen in years had been the one to save her. Around them, the glamorous party had shifted into chaos. Investors whispered, reporters typed furiously on their phones, and Vanessa's mocking smile had vanished, replaced with nervous silence. And then, Jack stepped closer to Marcus. His voice dropped to a tone only a Navy SEAL could muster, one that made the millionaire's bravado crumble. "You ever touch her again?" Jack said, his eyes locking on Marcus's, "and you'll regret it." The music still played in the background, but the night had changed forever. Elena wasn't just the silent wife anymore. She was the center of a scandal that would soon shake Marcus's empire to the core. And with her brother by her side, she wasn't as powerless as everyone thought. Because this was only the beginning. Elena Carter had never been the kind of woman who craved the spotlight. She grew up in a quiet suburban neighborhood, the daughter of a mechanic and a schoolteacher, living in a modest two-bedroom house that always smelled faintly of motor oil and fresh-baked bread. Life was simple, sometimes hard, but filled with warmth. She was the kind of girl who found joy in sketching by the window, who saved her allowance for second-hand novels, who dreamed of love as something steady and kind, not flashy or cruel. From the time she was little, Elena believed family was everything. She believed in loyalty, sacrifice, and promises kept. Those values were etched into her heart the night her older brother Jack enlisted in the Navy. She was only 14 then, clinging to him as though letting go would break her world apart. Jack promised her he'd always protect her, no matter how far away he was. And for years, his letters came, short, scribbled notes from far-off bases, words that reminded her she wasn't alone. But life moved on. She studied graphic design at a community college, worked part-time at a coffee shop, and slowly built a small life for herself. She never had much, but she was content. That was when she met Marcus Carter. He walked into the coffee shop one afternoon like he owned the world. Polished shoes, expensive watch, the kind of swagger that made everyone notice. He ordered an Americano, then stayed for hours, claiming he needed a quiet place to work. But Elena noticed the way his eyes kept drifting toward her, how his compliments slipped into their small talk. Marcus was magnetic. He told her she was beautiful when she was still wearing her apron with coffee stains on it. He said she had a quiet elegance, something rare and priceless. For a girl who had spent her whole life in the shadows, his attention felt like sunlight. Against her better judgment, she fell for him. Their whirlwind romance moved fast. Marcus showered her with gifts she'd never imagined, designer handbags, weekend trips, candlelit dinners at places she didn't even know existed. He made promises, whispered that she would never have to struggle again. When he proposed, Elena believed she was stepping into her own fairy tale. At first, marriage seemed like a dream. They lived in a sprawling mansion with glass walls overlooking the city. Elena traded her old car for a sleek SUV. Marcus insisted she deserved. She thought she had found safety, security, and love all wrapped into one. But it didn't take long for cracks to show. Marcus was charming in public, but behind closed doors, he grew colder. His career consumed him, and his ambition left little room for tenderness. He began to mock Elena for her simplicity, her inexpensive clothes, her lack of connections, her quiet voice at high society events. She tried harder, wore the dresses he bought her, smiled through the gossip, and silenced her own discomfort. When she became pregnant, Elena hoped everything would change. She thought the child would soften Marcus, bring them closer, remind him of the love that had once existed. For a brief moment, it seemed true. Marcus bought baby clothes, took her hand at doctor's appointments, and spoke about the future. But soon, his excitement faded. He began staying out late, attending parties without her, showing up in photos with Vanessa Steele, the woman everyone whispered about. Elena tried to ignore the rumors, clinging to the belief that love could be salvaged. She stayed quiet, hoping silence would keep her marriage intact. Yet inside, she was unraveling. Pregnancy was hard enough, the morning sickness, the swollen ankles, the endless fatigue. But carrying those struggles alone while your husband flirted with another woman was unbearable. Elena often cried in the nursery at night, sitting in the rocking chair meant for her baby, whispering promises to the child inside her. "You will never feel unloved," she vowed softly. "Not the way I do." Still, she tried to present the image of a dutiful wife. She told herself she was staying for the baby, that Marcus would one day see her worth again. But the truth was harsher. She had become invisible to the man who once claimed she was everything. The poolside party was only the latest humiliation in a string of many. And though Elena had spent years shrinking herself to fit into Marcus's world, she didn't realize that night would be the breaking point, the moment her life would split into before and after. Because when Marcus shoved her, when his hand turned cruel in front of everyone, the illusion shattered. It wasn't just about being unloved anymore. It was about survival. For her, for her baby, for the dignity she had nearly lost. And when her brother Jack appeared, when his arms pulled her back from the water's edge, it was as though fate itself had stepped in. For years, she thought she had no one. But Jack's sudden return reminded her of something she had forgotten. She wasn't powerless. She had family. She had strength buried deep inside. The girl who once lived quietly in her parents' house, who thought love was about sacrifice and silence, was gone. In her place stood a woman who had seen the mask ripped from her husband's face. And for the first time, Elena began to wonder if she could rise again, not just as Marcus's discarded wife, but as a mother, a sister, and a woman with her own fire. Because in that moment, one truth became painfully clear. Marcus Carter had created his own worst enemy, the woman he thought he could break. The Carter mansion had been built to impress, and tonight it lived up to its purpose. From the gated driveway where valets ushered in Lamborghinis and Rolls-Royces, to the sprawling terrace that wrapped around the turquoise infinity pool, every inch of the estate screamed wealth. Chandeliers imported from Italy glimmered over the outdoor bar. White roses floated in glass bowls across tables draped in silk. A DJ spun tracks beside the pool, while servers in crisp uniforms carried trays of champagne that never seemed to run out. It was the kind of night designed for headlines, and Marcus Carter wanted nothing less. Boasting the most exclusive poolside party of the summer was his way of cementing his image as a man of power, influence, and endless charm. Investors, celebrities, models, and politicians brushed shoulders beneath the palm trees, every smile carefully staged for cameras. But for Elena, the glamour was suffocating. She stood near the pool's edge, feeling as though the music was miles away. The guests shimmered with sequined gowns and sharp tuxedos, their laughter rising like smoke into the warm night air. Elena wore the soft blue dress she had chosen herself, one she thought was elegant but modest. Compared to the glittering women around her, she felt like a shadow in her own home. Her hand rested protectively over her belly as she scanned the crowd for Marcus. He was never hard to find, always in the center, surrounded by admirers. And there he was now, across the terrace, leaning close to Vanessa Steele. Elena's stomach tightened as she watched Vanessa lay a manicured hand on Marcus's arm, laughing a little too loudly, leaning a little too close. Elena swallowed her pride, telling herself she wouldn't cause a scene. She had promised herself countless times that she would keep the peace, that she wouldn't let her emotions embarrass him in public. But humiliation had a way of creeping in, no matter how hard she tried to ignore it. She overheard snippets of conversation as guests passed by. Marcus really knows how to throw a party. Who's the woman in the blue dress? Oh, that's his wife? Doesn't look like she belongs here. She looks so plain. Vanessa's the one who matches his world. Each comment sliced through Elena like glass. She forced herself to breathe, to stand tall, to keep her eyes on the glowing pool, rather than the whispers curling behind her back. The music swelled, and the night deepened, the scent of champagne mixed with chlorine and jasmine. Waiters passed by with trays of lobster canapés, but Elena couldn't bring herself to eat. Her nerves twisted too tightly. She felt both exposed and invisible, seen enough to be mocked, ignored enough to be forgotten. She remembered when she and Marcus first moved into this house. He had promised her the pool parties would be theirs, nights filled with love and laughter. She had imagined evenings where she could rest her head on his shoulder while they watched the city lights shimmer in the distance. Instead, the pool had become his stage, and she his unwanted prop. As Marcus raised a glass to toast a group of investors, Vanessa slid beside him, her red dress glowing under the lights like a flame. Elena watched him drape an arm over Vanessa's chair, the gesture casual but intimate. For the world, it was entertainment. For Elena, it was betrayal. Again and again, in front of everyone. Her baby kicked softly, reminding her that she wasn't alone. She whispered under her breath, "I'm still here. I'm still your mother." She moved away from the crowd, closer to the water, seeking a sliver of calm. The pool sparkled with thousands of lights embedded along the edges, the reflection of the stars dancing across the surface. Somewhere inside the house, music shifted into a slower rhythm. Couples swayed together while photographers snapped pictures. But Elena stood apart, more a spectator than a wife. As the night dragged on, Marcus finally noticed her, or rather noticed her absence from his orbit. He strode across the terrace with Vanessa lingering close behind him. His smile was tight, his voice sharp. "What are you doing over here?" he demanded, though his words were softened with a fake charm for the guests within earshot. "I needed some air," Elena answered quietly, her fingers tightening over her belly. Marcus sighed dramatically. "You're supposed to mingle, Elena. People notice when you hide away like this. Do you know how it makes me look?" Elena's heart sank. It wasn't about her feelings. It was about his image. Always his image. Before she could respond, Vanessa's voice cut in, dripping with venom. "She's not hiding, Marcus. She's just uncomfortable. This isn't really her scene, is it?" A ripple of laughter rose from those nearby, as though Vanessa's cruelty was entertainment. Elena felt her cheeks burn. She wanted to speak, to defend herself, but the words lodged in her throat. Marcus leaned in, his whisper a dagger. "Just smile and behave, Elena. That's all I ask. Don't ruin this for me." Her eyes stung. Behave, as though she were a child, as though her silence was her only worth. The night's beauty blurred into something bitter. The shimmering pool, the glittering gowns, the expensive champagne, all of it felt hollow, a cage she couldn't escape. The laughter around her no longer sounded like music, but like jeers, echoes of a world where she would never belong. And deep down, Elena realized something she had been denying for months. This wasn't just about Vanessa or Marcus's betrayal. It was about the life she had given up, the woman she had buried inside herself just to stand by his side. The pool sparkled, reflecting the fractured pieces of a life that looked perfect on the outside, but was cracking at its core. The party roared on, oblivious. Cameras flashed, toasts were made, and Marcus basked in the glow of admiration. But Elena's chest tightened with a silent scream. Something was coming, something she couldn't stop. Because sometimes it only takes one cruel moment in a glittering night for the mask to fall away. And that moment was closer than anyone imagined. Marcus Carter was the kind of man people either envied or feared. To the outside world, he was the self-made millionaire, the charming host, the man who could close billion-dollar real estate deals with a smile. His face appeared in magazines, his name trended on financial blogs, and his charisma lit up every gala he attended. But behind the flash of cameras and the curated image was a man who believed love was a transaction. Loyalty, a weakness, and people, especially women, were tools to be used and discarded. Elena had once thought his confidence was strength. Now she saw it for what it truly was: arrogance laced with cruelty. The party was Marcus's playground. He thrived on the admiration, the whispered envy, the constant validation. When he walked through the crowd, people parted as though he were royalty. He lived for that power, and nothing and no one was allowed to dull his shine. Not even his pregnant wife. Vanessa Steele knew this about him, and she knew how to use it. She was everything Elena wasn't: bold, glamorous, and unafraid to demand attention. Her long red dress shimmered like fire under the lights, her laughter echoing across the terrace. To Marcus, Vanessa was exciting, a symbol of the youth and luxury he craved. To Vanessa, Marcus was a ticket to the world she'd always wanted, a world of wealth, power, and notoriety. Together, they made a cruel pair. "Marcus," Vanessa whispered as they leaned against the marble bar, her eyes flicking toward Elena, standing near the pool. She looks so lost. Honestly, it's embarrassing. People are starting to notice. Marcus followed her gaze. His jaw tightened. She's supposed to be mingling. She knows better. Vanessa smirked. Maybe she does, maybe she doesn't, but if you want to keep climbing, Marcus, you can't let her drag you down. Investors don't want to see weakness. They don't want a wife who looks ordinary. The venom in her voice dripped like poison. But Marcus didn't defend Elena. He didn't remind Vanessa that Elena was his wife, the mother of his child. Instead, he nodded as if Vanessa's words were gospel. She'll learn, he said coldly. It wasn't just the words, it was the way he said them, with the detached tone of a man talking about an employee who wasn't performing well. To Marcus, Elena was no longer a partner. She was a liability. Later in the evening, when a group of investors approached, Vanessa clung to Marcus's arm like she belonged there, her smile dazzling. Elena watched from across the terrace, her throat tight, as Marcus introduced Vanessa by name. Charming, flattering, almost as though she were his wife instead. Elena's stomach turned as she realized he hadn't once bothered to introduce her that night. And Vanessa thrived in that spotlight. She leaned close, whispered jokes in Marcus's ear, touched his arm with calculated intimacy. Every gesture was a performance, one Elena couldn't ignore. Guests whispered, phones discreetly snapped photos, and still Marcus didn't care. Vanessa waited until Elena came closer, then delivered the cruelest blow yet. "You must be exhausted," Vanessa said with mock concern, her eyes dropping deliberately to Elena's pregnant belly. "Carrying all that weight around, while Marcus carries the weight of an empire." A ripple of laughter spread through the group. Elena's chest burned with humiliation, her eyes stinging. She wanted to turn and walk away, but Vanessa wasn't finished. "Honestly, Marcus," Vanessa continued with a sly smile, "she doesn't really fit this world anymore, does she?" Elena froze. The world? It was as if Vanessa was declaring in front of everyone that Elena was an outsider in her own marriage, her own home. Marcus's silence was louder than any defense. He didn't protest. He didn't correct Vanessa. He simply sipped his champagne, a smirk tugging at his lips. The message was clear. Vanessa was right. For Elena, the realization was devastating. She had given up everything, her career, her independence, her peace of mind, for this man. And now, in front of everyone, he allowed another woman to reduce her to nothing. But Marcus wasn't finished proving his cruelty. As the night wore on, he grew bolder. He laughed with Vanessa, touched her waist as though Elena didn't exist, and flaunted his disregard openly. Guests exchanged uneasy glances, some whispering about his audacity, others waiting to see how far he would go. And Marcus went further. When Elena finally mustered the courage to approach him, to gently remind him she was still there, still his wife, Marcus turned on her with a venom she had never seen in public before. "Stop hovering," he snapped, his voice sharp enough to draw attention. "Why can't you just stand there and look pretty, Elena? Do you have any idea how hard I work to keep this image, and you?" He stopped himself, but the damage was done. The words hung in the air like poison. Elena's face burned as the crowd murmured, as Vanessa's smile widened into triumph. For Marcus, it wasn't enough to ignore her. He had to belittle her, to strip her dignity piece by piece until nothing remained. And in that moment, Vanessa leaned closer, whispering just loud enough for Elena to hear. "Maybe one day he'll finally realize you were just a placeholder." The cruelty cut deeper than any knife. Elena felt her knees weaken, her grip tightening over her belly as though to shield her child from the venom surrounding her. But Marcus, drunk on pride and power, wasn't done yet. His voice dropped into a mocking tone, laced with disdain. "Maybe if you acted more like a wife and less like dead weight, we wouldn't be having this problem." The crowd shifted uncomfortably. Even those accustomed to scandals were unsettled by the open cruelty. But Marcus didn't care. He never cared. He looked at Elena not with love, not even with anger, but with the cold detachment of a man who had already discarded her in his mind. "And Vanessa?" She smiled, as though victory was hers, as though Elena's pain was nothing more than entertainment. The night had reached its boiling point. The mask had slipped completely, revealing the heartless man Marcus truly was, and the mistress who encouraged his every cruelty. But what neither of them realized was that they had pushed Elena to her limit, and the moment that would destroy Marcus's carefully crafted empire was only seconds away. Because humiliation has a breaking point, and Elena's breaking point was about to arrive. The night had grown thicker. the party louder. The pool shimmered beneath strings of golden lights, and the air buzzed with the hum of laughter, music, and whispered gossip. Marcus Carter, glass of champagne in hand, was in his element, while Elena felt as though the ground beneath her feet was cracking. She had spent the entire evening enduring the ridicule, swallowing the sting of Vanessa's barbed remarks, and pretending not to hear the cruel whispers of strangers. But the breaking point came when Marcus paraded Vanessa through the crowd as though she were the queen of the night, leaving Elena to stand alone near the pool's edge. She couldn't take it anymore. Gathering her courage, Elena walked toward him. Her steps were careful, protective of the life growing inside her, but her heart pounded with determination. She would not let herself be erased. She would not let Vanessa take her place in front of the very world that once celebrated her as Marcus's wife. The moment she reached him, she laid a trembling hand on his arm. "Marcus," she said softly, her voice steady despite the storm inside. "I am your wife. Don't forget that." The words hung in the air. Some nearby guests turned their heads, curiosity flashing in their eyes. Cameras rose discreetly, ready to capture the drama that was unfolding. Marcus's jaw tightened, his smile faltering. He hated being challenged, especially in public. He leaned close, his voice sharp enough to cut glass. "Not here, Elena. Not tonight." But she didn't back down. For the first time in months, she looked him in the eye, her hand firm against his arm. "Then when, Marcus? When will you remember who I am? When will you stop pretending I don't exist?" The murmurs grew louder. A circle of spectators formed, pretending to sip their drinks while watching intently. Vanessa's eyes gleamed with satisfaction, as though she had orchestrated the entire scene. Marcus's temper snapped. "You don't belong here," he hissed, his voice rising above the music. "You're a burden, Elena. Do you understand? You're dragging me down. Look at you, standing here pathetic, clinging to me while I try to build something greater. Why can't you just stay quiet and let me live?" Gasps erupted. Phones lifted higher. The image of Marcus Carter, the glamorous millionaire tearing down his pregnant wife in front of a crowd, was seared into every witness's mind. Elena's lips trembled. The humiliation cut deeper than any blade, but still she held his gaze. "I am your wife," she repeated, her voice breaking but strong enough to carry. Something dark flickered in Marcus's eyes, rage mixed with fear. The crowd, the cameras, the whispers closing in. He needed to assert control, to show everyone he was untouchable. And then, without warning, his hand shot out. He shoved her. The motion was swift, violent, and utterly shocking. Elena's body stumbled backward, her arms flailing as the world tilted around her. Her heart lurched, terror crashing through her as her swollen belly pulled her off balance. The crowd gasped in unison. A woman screamed. A phone clattered to the ground as someone fumbled to catch the scene. Elena's foot slipped against the wet tile of the pool's edge. She felt her body tipping, the shimmering water rising toward her, the sound of the party fading into a dull roar. For a split second, all she could think was, "My baby." Time slowed. She saw Marcus's face twisted in anger, Vanessa's lips curved into a cruel smirk, the blur of horrified expressions from strangers who did nothing but watch. And then, arms wrapped around her, strong, steady, unshakable. She was yanked back from the edge of disaster, pulled against a chest she hadn't leaned on in years. Her body trembled as air rushed back into her lungs. Elena blinked through tears, her vision clearing, and saw him, Jack Lawson, her brother, the lifeguard no one expected. The man who had once tucked her into bed after their father's late-night shifts, who had written her letters from war zones, who had promised her he would always protect her, even from oceans away. Now, here he was, holding her as though she were still his little sister, shielding her from the man who had just tried to destroy her. The crowd erupted in shocked murmurs. Phones captured every angle, flashes of light searing the scene into permanence. The story was no longer just whispered gossip, it was evidence, recorded, undeniable. Marcus's face paled. He hadn't expected anyone to intervene, least of all Jack. He took a step forward, trying to mask his panic with arrogance. "She tripped," he barked. "Everyone saw it, it wasn't me." But no one believed him. Not with cameras rolling, not with dozens of witnesses frozen in disbelief. Jack set Elena gently on her feet, his arms still firm around her shoulders. His eyes locked onto Marcus's with the cold, unwavering gaze of a soldier who had stared down enemies more dangerous than him. "You shoved a pregnant woman," Jack said, his voice low but carrying like thunder. "You shoved my sister." The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. Even the music seemed to falter, the DJ unsure whether to keep playing. Marcus tried to laugh, but the sound was hollow, brittle. "You don't understand. She was in the way. She's always in the way." The words only made it worse. Gasps turned into mutters, mutters into judgment. His empire of charm was crumbling before his eyes. Helena clung to Jack, her tears streaming freely now, not from weakness but from the shock of realizing she had nearly lost everything, her dignity, her baby, her life. But she wasn't alone anymore. Jack's grip tightened as he stepped forward, placing himself between Helena and Marcus. His presence was unshakable, his authority undeniable. He wasn't just her brother tonight. He was her protector, her shield, the one man Marcus could never intimidate. The crowd watched, breathless. Investors, socialites, strangers, all witnessing the fall of Marcus Carter in real time. And in that moment, Helena realized something that made her heart pound with new strength. The man who had spent years belittling her, ignoring her, and finally shoving her, had just destroyed his own empire. Not with a failed deal, but with a single act of cruelty. And the night was far from over, because Jack wasn't done, and neither was Helena. The party had dissolved into chaos after the shove. What was once a glamorous poolside soiree had turned into a scandalous spectacle. Guests whispered in tight circles, phones buzzed as videos were uploaded in real time, and the Carter name, once synonymous with success, was now plastered across screens in shame. But for Helena, none of that mattered. She wasn't thinking about investors or gossip or Marcus's unraveling empire. She was thinking about the trembling inside her body, the pounding of her heart, and the life growing within her. Her brother Jack had guided her away from the terrace, shielding her from the eyes and the cameras, into one of the mansion's private rooms. It was quieter here, but the silence did nothing to calm the storm in her chest. She sat on the edge of a velvet couch, clutching her belly with both hands, trying to breathe through the panic that clawed at her lungs. "Helena," Jack said gently, crouching in front of her. His hands, once trained to steady rifles and rescue comrades, now rested lightly on her knees. "You're safe. I've got you. Nothing will happen to you or the baby. Not while I'm here." But Helena shook her head, her tears spilling freely. "Safe? Jack, he shoved me. My own husband shoved me like I was nothing. What if I'd fallen? What if the baby?" Her words broke into a sob. Jack's jaw clenched, his eyes dark with fury. "He's not a husband. Not anymore. He's a coward." But the comfort did little to ease her despair. Helena wasn't just shaken, she was shattered. She buried her face in her hands, memories crashing into her. The nights she had defended Marcus to friends who whispered about his affairs. The mornings she had forced a smile, even when she knew he was lying. The countless times she had told herself things would get better, that if she just stayed quiet, if she just endured, love would return. But it hadn't. And now, the whole world had seen the truth. "I've lost everything," she whispered. Jack frowned. "No, you still have yourself. You still have me. You have your child?" But Helena couldn't see it. All she could see was the ruins of a dream she had built with trembling hands. "The world saw him push me, Jack. Do you know what they'll say? That I'm weak, that I let this happen, that I'm the wife who couldn't hold on to her husband." Her voice cracked, rising into hysteria. "I'm a failure as a wife, a failure as a mother before I've even begun." Jack's hands gripped hers firmly. "Don't you dare say that. You are not a failure. He failed you. He humiliated you. He betrayed you. That's on him, not you." But Helena was spiraling. The shame, the fear, the humiliation, it was all too much. Her breaths came in shallow gasps, her chest tight as though the walls were closing in. She could hear the faint thrum of music from the terrace, the echo of laughter that no longer sounded human but monstrous, mocking. She rose unsteadily to her feet, pacing the room like a caged animal. "How am I supposed to raise this baby? How am I supposed to survive without him? I gave up everything for Marcus, Jack. My job, my independence, my voice. And now what do I have? Nothing. Just nothing." Her sobs filled the room, raw and broken. Jack stood, wrapping his arms around her as she shook in his embrace. "You still have fight in you," he murmured. "I see it, You may feel broken, but I know my sister. You don't stay down forever." But Elena couldn't believe him. Not yet. Hours passed. The party ended in whispers and scandal, with Marcus and Vanessa slipping away to avoid the flashing cameras. But the damage was already done. By morning, the video would be viral. By morning, Marcus's empire would tremble. Yet Elena didn't care about revenge or empires. Not now. When the last guest had gone, Elena sat by the nursery upstairs, staring at the half-finished crib Marcus had ordered, but never once touched. The room smelled faintly of paint and new wood, but to her it smelled like broken promises. She pressed a hand to her stomach, whispering softly to her unborn child. "I'm sorry," she said. "I'm so sorry. I should have left him sooner. I should have protected you from this." The baby shifted gently inside her, as though answering. It only made her cry harder. Jack entered quietly, leaning against the doorframe. "You didn't deserve any of this," he said softly. "But maybe it happened for a reason. Maybe tonight was the night you stop hiding, Lena." Elena looked up at him, her eyes swollen, her voice hoarse. "I don't know how to be strong anymore." Jack walked over, kneeling beside her again. His eyes were steady, his voice certain. "You don't have to know how. You just have to decide you will. And when you do, I'll be right here to back you up." But Elena only shook her head, her doubt consuming her. She had been silenced for so long, diminished until she no longer recognized herself. How could she suddenly rise from the ashes when she barely had the strength to stand? The night dragged on, heavy with despair. For the first time since she married Marcus, Elena admitted to herself that love was gone, that her marriage was ashes. But knowing that truth didn't heal her. It hollowed her out. When dawn's light finally spilled across the horizon, Elena was still awake, her eyes fixed on the ceiling, her heart heavy with fear. She felt like a ghost in her own home, trapped in a life she no longer wanted but didn't know how to escape. She whispered again, to herself, to her baby, to the silence around her. "Maybe Jack is wrong. Maybe I really am broken." Her tears slipped into her hair as she closed her eyes. But downstairs Jack was making phone calls, his voice low and clipped, his tone the same one he had used on military operations. He wasn't waiting for Elena to believe in herself again. He was preparing something that would change everything. And Elena had no idea what was coming next. Morning light poured through the wide glass windows of the Carter mansion, but to Elena it felt cold and merciless. She sat at the edge of her bed, her hands folded protectively over her stomach, her eyes hollow from a night without sleep. The humiliation of the poolside incident replayed endlessly in her mind. The shove, the gasps, the flashes of cameras, the way Marcus's face had twisted with rage as though she were the enemy instead of his wife. She thought she was finished, broken, too weak to fight. But Jack Lawson had other plans. Her brother entered the room quietly, carrying 2 mugs of coffee. He set one on the nightstand and handed the other to her. His presence, calm but firm, was the only thing holding her together. "Drink," he said gently. "You'll need your strength." Elena took a sip, though her stomach churned. "Strength for what, Jack? To keep hiding, to face another day where everyone calls me pathetic?" Her voice cracked. "You saw it. I couldn't even defend myself. I'm nothing." Jack sat across from her, his eyes steady. "No, you're not nothing, and you're not done. You just don't know what cards you're holding yet." She frowned, confused. "What are you talking about?" Jack leaned forward, lowering his voice. "While I was deployed, I kept track of Marcus, not because I cared about him, but because I knew someday his greed would put you in danger. And I was right. The shove wasn't the first line he crossed, it's just the first one the world saw." Elena blinked. "What do you mean?" Jack pulled a slim folder from inside his jacket and placed it on the bed between them. Her heart skipped as she stared at it. "Marcus has been laundering money through shell companies. He's been bribing inspectors, cutting corners on construction, and siphoning investor funds into private accounts offshore. I have proof. Emails, bank transfers, recordings." Elena's breath caught. How do you even have this?" "I have contacts," Jack said simply. "People who owed me favors, men I served with, investigators who trust me more than they'll ever trust him. I've been watching him, Lena, waiting. And last night, he gave us the perfect trigger. Now the whole world is watching him, questioning him, which means we have the upper hand." Elena shook her head, stunned. You're saying Marcus could lose everything? Jack's expression hardened. I'm saying Marcus will lose everything. If you want him exposed, I can make that happen. The words hit her like a tidal wave. For months, she had been drowning in helplessness, believing Marcus held all the power. But now, sitting in front of her was proof that his empire was built on lies, and that she had the ability to bring it crashing down. Still, doubt gnawed at her. Even if you have this, what good is it? He's powerful, Jack. He has lawyers, connections, people who protect him. Jack shook his head. Not anymore. Not after what he did last night. Investors will run the second they think their money isn't safe. Politicians will distance themselves. And the press, they'll eat this alive. Marcus doesn't realize it yet, but he's standing on quicksand. Elena's pulse quickened. For the first time in months, she felt a spark, small but undeniable, of hope. But with it came fear. If I do this, if I stand against him, he'll come after me. He'll try to destroy me. Jack's voice was steady, unyielding. Then let him try. You're not alone this time. You have me, and you have something he can't fight. Truth. Tears filled Elena's eyes, but they weren't tears of despair this time. They were tears of something new, something stronger. She whispered, almost to herself, I don't have to stay silent anymore. Jack nodded. No, you don't. But you need to make a choice. You can take this file and burn it, keep living in his shadow, waiting for the next time he decides to shove you down. Or, his eyes locked on hers, you can use it. You can rise. You can show the world who he really is. Elena's hands trembled as she reached for the folder. Her fingers brushed the edge of the papers, her heart racing. Every instinct in her screamed to run, to hide, to keep pretending. But beneath the fear, another voice whispered, one she hadn't heard in years, the voice of the girl she used to be. The girl who believed in family, in love, in her own worth. She opened the folder. Pages of damning evidence stared back at her. Emails with Marcus's signature, wire transfers with his name, documents stamped with his company logo. It was undeniable. Her tears fell onto the pages, not from sorrow this time, but from the weight of possibility. Jack's hand rested on her shoulder. You're stronger than you think, Lena. I can fight him in the shadows, but the real blow, the one that finishes him, it has to come from you. The world needs to see the wife he tried to silence standing tall. Elena wiped her tears, her chest rising with a shaky breath. Then I'll do it. I'll fight. Jack's lips curved into a rare smile. That's my sister. For the first time, Elena straightened her shoulders. She wasn't just the humiliated wife anymore. She wasn't just the pregnant woman shoved at a party. She was Elena Carter, and she was about to take back everything Marcus had stolen from her. But Jack wasn't finished. There's one more thing you need to know. Elena looked at him, her heart pounding. What is it? Jack hesitated, then said, Marcus's investors aren't just businessmen. Some of them are dangerous. If they find out he's been cheating them, they won't just ruin him financially. They'll destroy him. And if you stand in his way, they'll come for you too. Elena's breath hitched. The room suddenly felt smaller, the air heavier. Jack leaned closer, his voice grave. If you go down this road, there's no turning back. You'll be making enemies you can't even see. Elena swallowed hard, gripping the folder tighter. Fear coursed through her veins, but beneath it burned a fire she hadn't felt in years. I've already lost everything once, she said quietly. I'm not afraid to lose what's left. Not if it means protecting my child. Not if it means ending him. Jack studied her, then nodded slowly. Then it settled. Marcus Carter is going down. The weight of her decision pressed heavily on her shoulders, but for the first time in so long, she felt like she was standing on solid ground. Elena Carter was no longer just a victim. She was a storm waiting to break, and the world had no idea what was coming. The morning after the poolside scandal, Marcus Carter woke to a nightmare he couldn't control. Headlines screamed across every platform. Millionaire shoves pregnant wife at poolside party. Marcus Carter's empire crumbles amid viral video. Vanessa Steele, mistress at the scene. Clips of the shove replayed endlessly on news channels, slowed down frame by frame. Commentators debated whether his career was over, while social media burned with outrage. Sponsors pulled out, investors demanded answers, and his phone rang without pause. For the first time in his carefully crafted life, Marcus wasn't admired. He was hated. But Marcus wasn't a man who surrendered easily. He stormed into his office, his voice booming as he barked orders. "This will blow over. We'll spin it. We'll say she tripped. Vanessa, get the PR team. I'll sue anyone who tries to ruin me." Vanessa, pale and shaken, tried to hide her own fear. The cameras had caught her smirk that night. She wasn't just a mistress anymore. She was complicit. And unlike Marcus, she had no empire to shield her. What Marcus didn't know was that Alina was no longer cowering in silence. While he scrambled to protect his image, Alina was preparing for war. With Jack by her side, she met quietly with a team of investigators and attorneys. The folder Jack had given her became her weapon. The evidence of Marcus's corruption was undeniable: money laundering, fraud, bribery, enough to topple his empire and land him behind bars. But Elena didn't want revenge in the shadows. Not anymore. She wanted the world to see her, strong, unbroken, and unwilling to let Marcus dictate her life 1 second longer. So she transformed. Gone was the soft blue maternity dress, the timid smiles, the woman who stood in the background. In her place was Elena Carter, radiant and commanding. She wore a tailored white gown that draped elegantly over her belly. Her hair swept back to reveal the sharp lines of her face, her eyes no longer filled with tears, but fire. Jack stood at her side, a silent guardian, but it was clear. This was Elena's fight now. The press conference was held at a downtown hotel ballroom. Reporters flooded the room, cameras flashing as Elena stepped to the podium. The room hushed, the world waiting. She placed her hands firmly on the stand, her voice steady and clear. "Last night, millions of you saw a man shove his pregnant wife. That man was my husband, Marcus Carter. For years I believed silence was love. I thought endurance was loyalty. I was wrong. Silence is surrender. Endurance is enabling. And love, real love, does not shove you down when you're already on your knees." Gasps filled the room. Flashes popped like lightning. Elena didn't falter. "I stayed quiet because I thought I was protecting my family. But the truth is, silence only protected him. Today I end that silence. Today I stand not as his wife, not as his victim, but as a woman who refuses to be erased." Jack stepped forward, handing the file of evidence to a state investigator waiting in the front row. Elena lifted her chin, her voice slicing through the silence. "My husband built his empire on lies, on stolen money, bribed officials, and broken promises. Here's the proof. I am turning it over to authorities today so justice can finally begin." The room erupted. Reporters shouted questions, cameras zoomed in on the damning documents, and within minutes, the story spread like wildfire. Marcus watched the live broadcast from his office, his face drained of color. His roar of rage shook the walls, but rage couldn't erase the truth. His empire was collapsing, and the woman he had tried to destroy was the one swinging the hammer. For Elena, it was more than revenge. It was rebirth. That night, as the city buzzed with the scandal, Elena sat with Jack on the hotel balcony. The weight on her chest was lighter than it had been in years. She touched her stomach, whispering softly to her baby, "You'll know strength, little one. You'll know dignity. And you'll never grow up thinking silence is love." Jack leaned on the railing, watching her with pride. "You did it, Lena. You didn't just survive, you won." She smiled through her tears, the first genuine smile in months. "I thought I was broken, but maybe I was just waiting to become who I was meant to be." Down below, protesters gathered outside Marcus's office building, holding signs, chanting his name with venom. Investors filed lawsuits, the government froze his accounts, and Vanessa vanished into obscurity. The empire he had sacrificed his soul to build was crumbling faster than he could patch the cracks. And Elena? She wasn't hiding anymore. She had reclaimed her voice, her dignity, her power. Days later, she walked into a charity gala, not on Marcus's arm, but on her own, with Jack at her side. The whispers were different this time. No longer pitying, no longer cruel. They were awed, respectful, inspired. She's the one who stood up to him. She's the reason he's finished. She's stronger than all of them. Elena didn't need to respond. She simply walked with her head high, her hand resting on her belly, the glow of resilience surrounding her. For the first time, she wasn't just a shadow in Marcus's world. She was the light of her own. And as the cameras flashed, capturing her transformation, Elena knew this truth. Marcus Carter had shoved her once, but she had risen higher than he could ever reach. Because women like her, women who endure, who suffer, who break and then rebuild, are unshakable. And no amount of money, power, or cruelty could ever silence her again. This was not her ending. It was her beginning. So that's how the story comes to an end, my dear friends. Are you still here with me right now? If you are, it must mean something in Elena's journey touched your heart in a way you didn't expect. And I want you to know, that's not just her story. It could be yours too. Elena's life teaches us something powerful. Even in the darkest, most humiliating moments, there is a spark inside of us that cannot be destroyed. She thought she was broken. She thought she had lost everything. And yet, in that very breaking, she found her strength. She rose. The Stoic philosopher spoke of this thousands of years ago. Seneca once said, "We suffer more often in imagination than in reality." How many times have we convinced ourselves we're too weak, too defeated, when in truth we were just one decision away from reclaiming our power? And Marcus Aurelius reminded us, you have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. That's exactly what Elena discovered. Silence is not love, endurance is not loyalty, and true strength is not about never falling. It's about rising every time we do. And maybe, just maybe, if you're still listening right now, you needed that reminder for your own life. That no matter who tried to shove you down, no matter how many times you felt unseen or unloved, you are still here. You still have the power to rise. So if this story spoke to you, I invite you to do 3 simple things. Hit the like button, share this video with someone who might need it, and subscribe to the channel so you can walk with us through more stories of resilience, healing, and transformation. Because remember, this isn't just Elena's story. It's a reminder for all of us. You are stronger than you think, and your beginning might be waiting right here, right now.